When I confronted the pythons in my attic, I realized the true monsters were the deceitful smiles of those who sold me this home. Would I finally reclaim my sanctuary, or remain a victim? The attic smelled of dust and long-forgotten memories, the air thick with the weight of neglect. As I flicked the flashlight beam across the sloped ceiling, the shadows danced menacingly, casting doubt on my courage. My heart pounded furiously against my ribcage, a primal response to the unmistakable rustling above. Each flicker of movement sent my nerves spiraling into a tempest of horror-laden thoughts. I had heard tales of snakes finding refuge in the warm corners of attics, but the absolute notion of colossal pythons weaving themselves into the labyrinth of my home was a nightmarish descent into madness. And yet, what other explanation could there be? It was this gnawing feeling, this deep-seated primal fright, that seeped through the cracks of my cozy sanctuary, reminding me that it was not just a home, but a battleground against unseen invaders. It wasn't merely my home that faltered under the pressure of bureaucratic negligence. It was my sense of security fractured by Martin Graves' relentless charm. That scheming real estate agent slithered around with a predatory air, smoothly glossing over problems that had lurked in the shadows of my new abode. The structural flaws and hidden perils, just a rough edge on the diamond he had sold me, covered up with a suave smile and rehearsed promises that echoed hollow. My blood boiled at the memory of our last encounter, where he had dismissed my concerns about the attic, waving them away like pesky flies. Oh, how he had laughed, the way one would at a child's fears, belittling my anxiety by assuring me that old houses have quirks. I seethed at the gall of that man, festering resentment like an open wound that demanded justice. The flashlight quivered in my grip as I climbed the last rung of the creaky ladder, the anticipation of discovery morphing into dread. Meanwhile, my mind berated me. Why had I not called for help? Why did I think I could confront whatever lurked in the darkness alone? I squeezed my eyes shut for a fleeting moment, fighting against the wave of panic that clawed at my throat. In that instant, I sensed the nature of my battle. It wasn't just pythons or anything monstrous that occupied my attic. It was a failure of trust, of faith in the community that had sworn to support me. Each rustle above felt like the laughter of a system that had turned its back on its own, propelling patrons into a cycle of exploitation. I inhaled deeply, steadying the swirling emotions, scrambling for supremacy, fiercely determined not to let fear keep me victimized. And then I saw them. Two sleek bodies coiled lazily on an old trunk, their scales glimmering with a deceptive beauty. It was both captivating and horrifying, my breath hitching as my mind raced. What now? My instinct screamed to flee, but the realization fell over me like a suffocating blanket. They were not mere beasts. These pythons were reflections of the battle I had waged against an unrelenting tide of entitlement, the audacity of Martin, the ineptitude of the housing authority. Each snake was a symbol of my struggle, occupying the very heart of my resolve. Swallowing my fears, I remembered Samira, the firecracker neighbor who understood wildlife better than the bureaucrats governing our community. I had no choice but to confront these creatures, and in doing so, reclaim control over my home. With renewed resolve, I carefully approached the serpents, my flashlight illuminating their unblinking eyes that mirrored the emotions surging within me. Here I was, the owner of a home that was supposed to be my sanctuary, facing down living embodiments of injustice. The pythons, still wrestling in their lethargic slumber, showed no signs of aggression. Instead, they highlighted my former naivety, my trust in the facade of safety my purchase had promised. As I recalled the bureaucratic smiles and insincere assurances, rage ignited within me, driving me to act. I didn't only want to rid myself of these creatures. I wanted to expose the failure that allowed such an absurdity to fester in my life. I turned to leave, my mind racing with plans to summon Samira and together forge a path toward resolution. But our fight would not end with mere removal. We were about to unleash a reckoning upon those who take advantage of unsuspecting homeowners. The battle raged beyond the confines of my attic, a struggle steeped in every crack and crevice of a collapsing system. The emptiness of my little suburban paradise flooded with purpose, no longer the quiet victim cowering behind oversized sweaters. I felt a fire stoke within, blistering away fear but igniting fierce anger that demanded justice, both for myself and for others who might find themselves captured in the same web of exploitation. As I descended the ladder, the attic no longer loomed as a sinister void, but as a battlefield that called upon me to take my stand. Was I ready to face the coming storm, armed with nothing but courage and the will to reclaim what was rightfully mine? As I stepped down from the attic, adrenaline pulsing through my veins, my breath came in sharp gasps, tearing through the remnants of my earlier panic. Each step was heavy with resolve, the hollow creaks of the floorboards below echoing the weight of my intent. I was no longer merely a frightened homeowner, but now an empowered warrior, battling against the insidious tide of negligence and subterfuge that had swept through my life. My sanctuary would not be claimed by bureaucratic apathy, nor would it allow predatory real estate agents like Martin Graves to strip away my peace. No, I would draw a line in the sand. If these pythons symbolize the monstrous tendency of those in power to view homeowners as expendable assets, then it was time to fight back with my voice at the forefront. I sprinted down the narrow hallway, my phone clutched tightly in my hand, reaching out for the one person who could translate my dwindling courage into action, Samira. Just a few doors down, her vibrant spirit had become a lifeline amidst my unraveling fears. I dialed, my heart hammering as the rings echoed in my ear. When she finally picked up, her voice was a sweet balm. "Hey, Lila, what's going on? You sound frantic." There was no time for half measures. "Samira, I need your expertise. There are massive pythons in my attic, and I don't think animal control will help. Can you come over?" The pause on the other end felt eternal, silently mocking my impending doom, until her enthusiastic reply burst forth. "Absolutely. I'll be right there." That flicker of hope ignited something deeper within me, a willingness to fight, to confront the chaos head-on rather than retreat into despair. As I prepared for her arrival, my mind replayed every moment of my dealings with Martin, tangling into a web of righteous indignation. The memory of his smug grin, as he glossed over my concerns, swelled my heart with fury. How dare he dismiss my home safety, reducing it to a mere point on a profit chart? The more I centered on the pythons, the clearer it became. They were only the physical manifestations of a much larger affliction festering in our community. With every thunderous rumble from the attic, it felt as though Martin himself was standing there, sneering at my vulnerability. But we, would dismantle the arrogance that sheltered him, peeling back layers of disdain to reveal the insidious practices he relied on to elevate himself at our expense. In the quiet moments leading up to Samira's arrival, I transformed my fear into focus, examining the bridge that connected my plight to a broader reckoning. I envisioned a neighborhood rally, one forged not just in desperation but in defiance against the dismissive attitudes of officials and agents who saw us as mere investments. If I could rally my neighbors, unite our voices, then perhaps even Martin Graves would tremble at the prospect of our collective fury. Yet, before any revolution could spark, I still faced my immediate crisis, the creatures resting ominously in the rafters. The thought drifted through, before exploding into a vivid narrative within my mind, blending a sense of urgency with the recollections of Samira's companionship. As someone who understood snakes, who welcomed them with whimsy rather than fear, she was poised to help turn my terror into transformative magic. Then came the knock at the door, steadfast like a drummer calling to arms. I swung it open to reveal Samira, a whirlwind bundled in vibrant colors with a backpack slung across her shoulder that was no doubt filled with her tools of the trade. Her expressive hazel eyes widened, glimmering with the thrill of adventure at the thought of helping me conquer a snake-ridden battleground. "Show me the way," she exclaimed, her contagious enthusiasm coiling around my fraying nerves like a balm. Armed with nothing but her clever wit and an in-depth knowledge of wildlife, she became my battlefield companion, a beacon of familiarity amidst the chaos. Together we ascended to the attic again, ready to confront this colossal entanglement of fear and injustice, transforming my solitary fight into a shared crusade. In the muted darkness of the attic, where shadows played tricks on our minds, Samira's laughter pierced through the suffocating atmosphere, reminding me that I was not alone in this venture. "These pythons are more curious than hostile," she assured me, her expertise rendering my previous dread laughable. There was an exhilarating fearlessness in the way she approached the snakes, moving slowly yet confidently, each moment deliberate. Watching her made me question why I had let incertitude darken my perspective for so long. Facing the pythons was no longer about defending my home from intruders. It was about reclaiming my life from the deceptive grip of fear exerted by the likes of Martin. Wasn't it time to confront the entire ecosystem that allowed such creatures, both literal and metaphorical, to infiltrate my existence? As Samira, a goddess of the wild, handled the pythons with a delicate yet commanding grace, I could feel the tide shifting. Each interaction felt like a galvanizing charge, awakening an indomitable spirit within me that clashed against the shadows of Martin's manipulation. The python slithered across her arms as she educated me on their behavior. But more than that, I began to recognize my own strength emerging. I wasn't just a passive player in this narrative anymore. I was a crucial force in rewriting the rules, chipping away at the oppressive weight of ignorance and exploitation surrounding us. With renewed determination, I suddenly realized, perhaps confronting these snakes was only the precursor to something infinitely more significant. Wouldn't taking down Martin Graves's facade and uniting my community behind this cause be the true victory? With Samira by my side, I felt an exhilarating sense of empowerment surge through me, steering my emotions from fear to resolve, igniting the fire of rebellion smoldering within my heart. The attic, which had once felt cursed, now shimmered with the potential of reclamation and justice, a crucible for transformation grounded in collective action. I would not only remove the pythons, but dismantle the layers of deception that had been lodged in my attic, exposing the failure of complacency that had allowed these monstrosities to manifest. The time for me to claim my home, my power, and my voice was no longer a distant hope, but a vivid reality shimmering on the horizon. Was I ready to confront the world beyond these walls, armed with the unity of community and a burning desire to expose the systemic exploitation that held us hostage? The air was thick with the scent of insulation and dust as Samira maneuvered through the attic, each slither of the python on her arm transforming the atmosphere from fear-soaked dread to curious awe. I stood just a few feet away, heart thundering as adrenaline coursed through my veins, yet the dynamic of power was shifting tonight. I had imagined confronting these serpents as a standoff, weapons pulled and tensions high, but in stark contrast, Samira was an artist amongst the chaos, coaxing their spirits from obscurity. Wasn't it poetic that in this moment, while I intended to reclaim my sanctuary, I would also discover the beauty buried beneath the surface of fear that paralyzed me for too long? Each glance at her, confident and composed, was a mirror reflecting my own growth, awakening a primal urge to stand firm against the forces that sought to undermine not just my home, but my very essence. With every whispered assurance Samira offered regarding the python's non-aggressive nature, a torrent of realizations surged within me. Perhaps, I mused, it had never been solely about the snakes, but rather about what they represented, the blatant disregard for what should be sacred. Each hiss from the attic above was a warning, an echo of the complacency that let injustice flourish unchecked. These creatures were merely the manifestation of deeper failures, my neighbor Karen's disdain, Martin's opportunism, and the community's quiet acceptance of fear as a way of life. If we could survive these monstrous intrusions, we could certainly rise above the bureaucratic chains that sought to bind us. The attic had morphed from a den of terror into a vibrant battleground, compelling me to fight alongside Samira, not just for myself, but for an awakening that could ripple through our neighborhood. As we navigated the complexities of these snakes, a parallel strategy began to unfurl in my mind, a rallying cry against indifference and inefficiency. Samira's laughter and unyielding spirit provided me with a foundation, a newfound connection that transformed solitary fear into a shared mission. I envisioned my neighbors gathering, not out of panic but united by a common goal, each voice rising in crescendos demanding respect and action. While I still felt the remnants of my previous anxiety, I clung desperately to the resolve kindling within me. Martin would not thrive if we became actively engaged in safeguarding our homes. Shivers of righteous fury coursed through me. How ridiculous it was that housing situations could be boiled down to mere profit margins rather than the lives woven into each space. I glanced at Samira. She had embraced the snakes so earnestly, her heart fully open to their existence. How could we extend the same level of empathy to each other as neighbors? It became glaringly evident in that attic. This wasn't just a confrontation with physical creatures, but a demand for accountability from those who turned a blind eye to our plight. I imagined myself stepping onto a makeshift stage at that rally, voice steady and unwavering as a tide of empowerment surged within me. Each word I would utter would resonate more deeply than mere grievances. They'd be seeds planted in the hearts of my neighbors, igniting their passion to reclaim even the smallest shard of autonomy we had lost to bureaucratic inaction. The momentum gathered as I envisioned appealing not just for my house, but for anything under threat, from the snake-infested attic to the system of exploitation masquerading as community governance. In every corner of our neighborhood lay echoes of testimony crying out for justice, and it was time to rise with ferocity, to become the collective fiery heart that would challenge the immeasurable arrogance of people like Martin Graves. With renewed vigor, we wrestled the remaining snakes, Samira guiding my hands as I absorbed her lessons. With every careful twist of my fingers around their sinuous bodies, I felt something almost transcendental stirring within me. It wasn't just about removing them from my rafters. It was a striking rebirth, a reclamation of my voice that had long been suffocated under the weight of inadequacies and injustices. Facing these well-adapted creatures demanded that I embody the same resilience. I glanced at Samira, our eyes meeting in a moment of shared understanding, knowing well that we were diving deep into a pact far beyond this attic. This was about empowerment. I would not be a victim in my own home, nor would I allow others to be trapped in their complacency. Just as we secured the last python gently within a makeshift container, a lull descended in the attic. The tension that had once shrouded the space dissipated into the rafters, replaced with a burgeoning aura of triumph. Samira's joyful exhale filled the silence, igniting a sense of excitement within me that buzzed like a live wire. See? Not so scary after all, right? She flashed a triumphant grin, and the rush of victory swelled within me, crashing in waves that bellowed louder than my initial fear. We hadn't just wrested control of the snakes. We had laid down the first stones to a campaign of change, steering us away from dread and towards fortitude. Looking down at the pythons peacefully curled in their temporary home below me, I felt emboldened to tell our neighborhood the story of resilience unfolding in that attic. What began as an insurmountable fear had been dismantled, revealing a united front prepared to reclaim what rightfully belonged to us. Together, we carefully descended from the attic, the scent of triumph thick in the air as I contemplated the journey ahead. My heart swelled with purpose. Samira had ignited a fire that would not simply extinguish in the face of adversity. All the loose ends of my thoughts were starting to weave together, forming a vision of compelling action that would demand accountability from Martin and rally our community. As we landed on solid ground, a wave of anticipation washed over me. This was not the conclusion, but merely the beginning. Would my neighbors stand beside me, ready to confront the monstrous entitlement that had taken root in our lives? I grinned at Samira, fire dancing behind my eyes as I envisioned the powerful response we would ignite together in our community. Our sanctuary demanded justice, and justice would be unflinchingly claimed. The moment we stepped out of the attic, the weight of our small victory began to transform into something much larger than I ever anticipated. I could still feel the pythons curled up in their temporary habitat as if they were a metaphorical embodiment of my own snuffed-out roar, silenced by fear and neglect for far too long. As I reached for my phone, the world outside felt too dim, too ordinary compared to the electric charge that pulsed through me. This sacred space, my sanctuary, had served not only as a home, but now as a conduit for revolutionary thoughts. I could sense Samira's warm presence beside me, her infectious enthusiasm matched only by the steadfast resolve blooming inside my chest. We were far from finished. No, this was just the beginning of a loudly resonating call for justice that felt riveting and unstoppable. As we gathered my neighbors to unveil what we had accomplished, a familiar buzz laced through the air, raising hairs on the back of my neck. I was struck by the vibrant tapestry of emotions woven through the faces of those who knew the plight of living under veils of neglect and indifference. They listened intently as I recounted our encounter with the snakes, my words echoing the defiance brewing within. "This isn't just about snakes," I shouted, reveling in the way my voice quaked with a passionate intensity I didn't know I possessed. "This is about reclaiming our spaces and standing up to those who might exploit our fears." The murmurs that rippled through the crowd felt like a gust of wind lifting us higher, igniting a shared fire to challenge the entitlement that had cast shadows over our lives. We exchanged glances, unspoken promises of solidarity brushing against the remnants of our fears. Time twisted and elongated as we drafted our petition, the emotional barometer of the room fluctuating from frustration to urgency. Each signature that flowed onto the paper felt like an affirmation of unity, a solid anchoring in the storm of injustices we had endured. "They will not get away with letting our homes become traps of exploitation," I declared, the fervor in my voice serving as a rallying cry against the insidious forces that sought to silence us. As people recounted their own stories of helplessness against Martin's duplicitous charm, the energy shifted from a shared victimhood to a fierce camaraderie. The building momentum whispered tales of triumph in the making. It wasn't merely an act of defiance, it was a communal act of reclamation, instilling hope that spread like wildfire, resonating louder than the indifference that had suffocated us for too long. But as our movement began to crystallize, the sinister side of the battle became glaringly apparent. I felt the thrill of coiled determination morphing intensely into simmering dread, especially as reports of Martin's manipulations began to surface. He was a master puppeteer, weaving in and out of the lives of families like ours, exploiting our vulnerabilities with practiced ease. The disbelief that clutched at me came with the realization that we were going to have to fight, not just against the pythons swarming our attics, but against the dreadful, complacent system that molded itself around his interests. As I shared the intentions behind the petition with Samira, nervous energy and flaring outrage flickered in my mind. If someone of his caliber could turn our sanctuary into a mockery of what it once stood for, who were we to believe we could win against someone so deeply entrenched in the nexus of power? But we knew in our hearts we could not afford to lose faith. Inspired by the strength swirling around me, I started gathering thoughts about not just confronting Martin, but challenging the very foundation of accountability. I envisioned organizing a town hall meeting where voices could rise together, presenting our stories as an unbroken chain of truth that would leave no room for distortion. There was power in connection, in the shared humanity that we had cultivated in our tireless quest for justice. It pulsated steadily, surging through us like a resonant heartbeat. "We'll invite him, the real Martin Graves," I declared, my voice a fierce whisper flowing through anticipation. "He won't escape the truth. He'll face us, and he'll hear every one of our stories, echoing the injustices we've endured." As I stood before my neighbors, this burgeoning coalition of dissatisfaction, I saw the fire mirrored back, hope ignited deeper in their eyes. We were transforming from fearful homeowners into warriors, ready to confront the insidious nature of our reality. With each face beaming with determination, I felt a burgeoning energy racing through the air, as if the walls of apathy around us were finally beginning to crack. Our journey would soon lead us to the doorstep of Martin Graves, where silence would bow down to shouts for acknowledgement and change. No longer would we be dismantled by the silence bred by fear. We stood together, ready to storm the fortress of indifference and emerge victorious, reclaiming our narrative once and for all. Would we become the collective heart beating fiercely for justice in our community, finally tearing down the walls of exploitation that had long sequestered us? The night air crackled with an energy that felt electric, a palpable tension that curled around us like a looming tempest. Our group had gathered at the community center, a hodgepodge of concerned residents ready to take back their autonomy. I looked around, noting the faces of my neighbors, each one a patch in this vibrant quilt of discontent. Anger, determination, and disbelief flickered behind their eyes, a fire burning brighter as we prepared for this historic confrontation. As I stood at the front, my heart galloped in rhythm with my hurried thoughts. They would face Martin Graves, and I felt a fierce, righteous fury engulf me, ready to seize the moment and harness it into something larger than our individual fears. "This isn't a personal battle anymore," I spoke, my voice steady despite the rising urgency in my chest. This is about how we redefine our community, how we reshape our spaces into what they were meant to be: safe, welcoming, and free from exploitation. As I stepped down to make way for the next speaker, I felt Samira's warm hand grip my shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the arduous road ahead. Each voice that stepped up to the mic propelled us further down a path that led, I hoped, to justice. One by one, my neighbors shared gut-wrenching stories that bared poorly concealed scars of hurt and exploitation. Little by little, we peeled back the layers of complacency and fear that had blanketed our lives. The stories rolled one into another like waves, accumulating weight and substance. I could feel the tension in the room escalate with each account shared. The anger became a tether that bound us together, drawing us closer to the tragic realization that our very sanctuary had been violated by this man whom we had once trusted. But as the clock ticked on, anxiety slithered back into my thoughts. What if we were not enough to bring down the facade? Would Martin brandish his typical charming deceit, using it to play the victim while undermining our collective integrity? I glanced at the stack of petitions laid out on the table, a stark reminder of the power we wielded in numbers, but doubt whispered ominously at the edges of my resolve. Just then, Samira stepped up again, her voice a soothing melody cutting through my swirling thoughts. We're more than just homeowners, she emphasized, flipping the narrative. We are a community, and our hearts beat as one. No longer can they dismiss us as isolated individuals waiting silently for change. Collectively, we are a force to be reckoned with. With every word she spoke, her infectious spirit rose. I could feel the room ignite, embers turning into flames as every shared laugh and nod fortified our unity. The palpable rhythm of our stories wove through the air, intoxicating urgency-building momentum that threatened to combust. I watched as the faces around me transformed from worry and indignation into fierce confidence. This was not just a town hall. This was a revolution clothed in the guise of a community meeting. We were no longer mere victims shuffling through the mundane dramas of suburban life. We were becoming architects of our narrative. As I caught the eye of an elderly neighbor who had sat silent for too long, I sensed her courage bubbling to life. The courage to rise despite years of compliance, despite fear that had driven her into submission. "We choose to reclaim our stories," I exclaimed, fueled by an urgency that felt primal. "We must confront Martin Graves and demand accountability for the cracks in our dream." Suddenly, a wave of murmurs rolled through the audience. Heads nodded vigorously in agreement. Their readiness invigorated me, transforming my seed of insecurity into a robust conviction. Each signature we collected represented not just an echo of our suffering, but a solid declaration of our intent. I felt emboldened, the weight of our shared dreams and fears soaring high above the mixed emotions of dread and excitement. We had a plan, an intricate web of strategies to ensnare Martin during the meeting. With Samira's knowledge of wildlife guiding us, I proposed a tactical approach. We would draw parallels between his exploitation of reptiles and how he wielded his influence over us, painting him as the undeniable villain in our town's wake of chaos. As the meeting drew to a close, we formulated our game plan for the next day, eager to confront Martin and lay bare our truths. That alone would shatter the veil he had meticulously spun around himself. We each penned our testimonies, brave declarations of how we had come to embrace a battle not just for our homes, but for our rights to live free from fear and blame. I could hardly contain my excitement as I watched groups huddling together, fervent discussions igniting passion among them, united by a raging fire for justice. When they first whispered about our shared plight, I never could have imagined we'd reach a dawn like this. Together, our wounds healed slightly by the recognizing glances exchanged, and the hope that had crept in during our deliberations. That night, as I climbed into bed, exhaustion threatened to sweep me under its waves, yet I remained steeled by an exhilarating strain of anxiety infused with fervent hope. The snakes nestled in the rafters of my home had transformed from symbols of dread into sacred icons of our collective fight, our defiance radiating through every corner of the community. When dawn broke, there would be no more fear, No more silence allowed to linger in the shadow of Martin's poor choices. Today marked a catalyst in our fight for dignity, a dramatic narrative ready to be unfurled with livid, flourishing courage. Would I stand before Martin Graves and finally find a way to uproot the decay seeded in our lives, or would I falter beneath his relentless charm? The stakes had never been higher, and I knew, deep in my heart, that we would choose to stand tall. The morning arrived cloaked in a thick veil of mist, the kind that dampened spirits and clung to clothes like unwelcome memories. I felt a pang of unease flare in my gut as I stared down the quiet suburban streets, each house concealing secrets behind white picket fences. Today was the day we would confront Martin Graves and hold him accountable. My fingers trembled as I straightened my oversized sweater, a flimsy shield against the chill, my thoughts buzzing like a hive of bees. I would not back down. I could almost hear the whispers of my neighbors mingling with the wind, summoning courage from generations past. Each of us, once isolated in our fears, now stood as a collective force, ready to unleash the truth, like lightning crashing down from the sky. With Samira's unwavering enthusiasm at my side, we approached the city hall, gathered like eerie shadows, whispering caution. As we entered the staid brown building, a wave of apprehension washed over me, nearly bringing me to a standstill. The sterile, fluorescent lights hummed ominously above, flickering as if mocking my confidence. I was hyper-aware of every creak from the old floorboards beneath my feet, echoing the doubts that tangled silently in my mind. What if we were mere specters battling a well-crafted facade? Upon entering the meeting room, faces became familiar. My neighbors, my fellow warriors, each animated with a mix of resolve and anxious energy. Our eyes locked, a silent pact formed among us. Despite the obstacles ahead, we were committed to rattle the complacency that had long settled over our neighborhood, its weight unbearable. As Martin strode into the room with his signature smugness, the atmosphere shifted. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that looked as if it had been stitched from the threads of deceit, he exuded an unwelcome charm that seeped into every corner. I could see the flicker of self-satisfaction dance in his icy blue eyes, the predator content in his hunt. There was a palpable tension, thick enough to cut with a knife, as he settled into his seat, casually flipping through a stack of papers like yesterday's gossip. My heart raced as I prepared to unpack the rage that had simmered and coiled within me for weeks. I was ready to expose not just his exploitation of us, but the system that had neglected our cries for help. This was a concrete battleground for truth, and I would wield every ounce of my fury with precision and intent. I began, my voice rising over the murmur of the room, steady, yet threaded with intensity. We stand here today, not merely as homeowners, but as custodians of our community. Each word reverberated against the walls as I spoke. I saw Martin squirm in his seat, the look in his eyes flickering, betraying his facade of control. For far too long we have allowed your exploitation to poison our sanctuary, festering like a wound that just won't heal. The room erupted in supportive whispers and nods, a chorus of shared anguish igniting the air around us. With each sentence, I dug deeper into my fears, transforming them into a clarion call that would not be silenced. I was not simply confronting a man. I was conquering the veil cast over our lives, leaving it tattered behind us. As I paused, the room buzzed with anticipation, the energy palpable as others leaned forward, ready to stake their claims. Samira was next, her voice rising with fierce resolve. "This isn't just our issue," she declared passionately. "It's about dismantling a system that thrives on fear and exploitation. Martin Graves has profited at our expense." Her words rang out like a battle cry, rekindling the embers of empowerment within the audience. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, transforming tentative support into fervent unity. I could see Martin struggling to maintain his composure under the mounting pressure, the facade of the charming real estate agent fraying at the edges as our collective fury intensified. We were no longer mere victims. We were warriors cloaked in righteous indignation, ready to bring this fight to its zenith. With every voice that rose in that room, I felt the tide of change sweep through us like a reviving wind. One by one, my neighbors shared their stories, peeling back layers of deception until we exposed the rot at the heart of our community. families forced to move due to unfulfilled promises, insecurity buried behind closed doors, and the reality of our houses becoming mere commodities in the high-stakes world of real estate. The revelations deepened the chasm between our lives and the illicit gains reaped by Martin. Finally, as we gathered our testimonies, handing each account personally to the city officials seated on the panel, the atmosphere shrieked with urgency. We were demanding justice, a reckoning, a glimpse of hope in a suffocating darkness. As the meeting drew to its tumultuous climax, I could see Martin's practiced smile slip, replaced by an unmistakable flicker of fear in his eyes. Had we finally wedged open the door to consequences he thought were shut? Had our unified cries carved out his sanctuary from our indignation? In that moment, I felt the sweet taste of victory brewing, an intoxicating blend of anger and determination. We were not merely citizens presenting grievances. We were a brewing storm, intent on dismantling the decay nestled within our streets. Together, we could herald a new dawn, one where dignity reigned supreme and fear no longer dictated our choices. Today would be a step toward justice, or so I hoped, fiercely grasping Samira's hand, emboldened to confront whatever awaited us in the aftermath of our confrontation. The tension in the room thickened like fog, wrapping itself around us as I strove to maintain my focus. Voices echoed off the sterile walls, a rising cacophony of emotions that only strengthened my resolve. I looked out into the sea of familiar faces, neighbors I had known for years, some since childhood, each infused with palpable determination and ferocity that radiated like the summer sun. Samira's eyes sparkled with defiance, lighting a fire in my chest. "We deserve much more than empty promises and deceit," I called out, feeling each word claw its way out of my throat. It felt as if the words were charged, laced with everything we had been suffering, our communal anguish mingling into something more potent than mere expression, transforming our pain into an unstoppable force. Martin, whose icy composure had begun to crack, attempted to intervene, but the room roared louder, drowning him out. "This isn't just about you and your rattling snakes, Lila," he spat, regaining a fraction of his misplaced authority. But the heat of our collective anger wrapped around his words like tendrils of smoke, making him appear even smaller than before. "This is about our families, our dreams. You ignored our cries, hoping we would remain paralyzed by fear." I struggled to suppress the urge to unleash every hurtful remark I had ever thought of, every slight I had tucked away into my mind's recesses. Instead, I relied on the strength of my community, channeling our pain into a relentless pursuit for justice. I could feel that the heart of our grievances was not simply that he had preyed on us individually. It was the very system that allowed him to thrive so maliciously. Each account presented, each testimony provided, chipped away at Martin's veneer of respectability, shattering it like porcelain. As each neighbor stepped up to share their truth, a whirlwind of revelations spun around the room. I watched as families recounted their struggles and losses, eyes welling with unremoved pain but ignited by shared purpose. Forgetting our hesitations, we rallied fervently together, desiring not only change but acknowledgement of our suffering, the reminder of our humanity amidst this cruel labyrinth of bureaucracy. As I listened, I could feel the cumulative weight of our stories propelling us toward a reckoning. We were shaking off the apathy that had been cultivated over years, illuminating the path towards change, our mutual purpose building like a crescendo, rising and swelling until it echoed like thunder in the uneasy silence. Samira's voice rang out again, casual yet commanding, as she highlighted Martin's underhanded tactics with vivid detail that made the room laugh despite the gravity of the situation. "He thinks he's untouchable. Just a slick-suited fox in a henhouse." This skillful turn of phrase ignited a spark in the audience, laughter intertwining with resentment, lifting spirits while also marking Martin, a man whose arrogance suddenly looked cagey and insecure. I couldn't help but join in, the absurdity of his now fractured front emerging as the bubble of tension burst, laughter wrapping around my fears like a warm embrace. We collectively encircled him, our voices like arrows ready to strike, penetrating the palpable ignorance that Martin had worn like armor for years. As the meeting veered closer to its conclusion, confidence surged within me like the tide swells at dusk. The officials at the front vetted our accusations with serious expressions, their eyes flickering back to Martin, slowly recognizing the voices of the people shoved under their rug. I could see the gears grinding in their minds. This wasn't solely about pythons and old rafters anymore. This was the dawn of community action against misconduct, the shameless exploitation of homeowners who were only trying to preserve their sanctuaries. The official at the center wore a furrowed brow, confronted with undeniable truths. The weight of responsibility settled heavily upon him as he exchanged glances with his colleagues. It felt like life simmered just below the surface, ready to erupt with profound change. Votes in favor for immediate community inspections, another official called, piercing through the din surrounding us. My heart thundered within my chest as hands shot up like a field of wildflowers breaking through the frost. Yes, yes, resonated through the air, an echo chamber of hope radiating with every raised palm. I fought hard against tears struggling for freedom. This unison felt palpable and triumphant, reshaping us from mere neighbors into a community bound by something monumental: justice. The crescendo of our unified voices peeled away the layers of fear. Our resilience transformed every eye into a promise for better days ahead. Each confession, each accolade of bravery, became immortalized in the air, weaving our anguished tales into a shared narrative of defiance. As the final "I" resounded, punctured by euphoric cheers from my neighbors, my chest surged with elation. The ghost of injustice that had loomed in the rafters of our homes now seemed a distant memory, a fading silhouette, overwhelmed by the vibrant tapestry of our united stand. We had uncovered layers of betrayal, rocketed towards an electrifying victory that promised safety, accountability, and sustainability for our homes. This was more than a momentary win. It felt like the beginnings of tangible change. As the officials gathered their notes, sealing our newfound alliance with a palpable commitment to wildlife management and an eye toward the future, I turned to Samira, her bright hazel eyes reflecting the triumph we had fought tooth and nail for. We faced the uncertain, yet hopeful horizon together, ready to reclaim our narrative, ready to write a new story. Was our battle against the absurdity not just a fleeting moment, but the blooming of a relentless struggle for justice?